Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. This is Kevin Klinkenberg. I'm really excited today to have a special guest on the program, my old friend and client, David Gale of Gale Communities. Dave, it's really great to see you. It's been way too long.
Well, it's been 20 years, Kevin. I've had the opportunity to listen to Messy City a number of times and respect what you're doing.
Well, I really appreciate it. There's a whole lot that I'd really like to talk about today. We'll get through as much as we can, and we'll try to keep it to about an hour. But I think there's a number of things. Dave was back in the day, as we might say, in 2001. Was really the first, I would say, significant client that my old firm had. With my friend Brian Hendrickson and our firm 180 Urban Design and Architecture. And we had the opportunity to work with Dave on a project called New Longview, which was a new urbanist project in Lee Summit, Missouri. And so we had an incredible experience working on that project together, conceiving of it, designing it, watching it get built in some fashion. And so we have a long history in that regard, but there's a lot more behind all that I think is interesting. And I think where I wanted to start with this today, Dave, was I knew a little bit about you when before we did that project, and we met on some committees and different things where we got to know each other a little bit. But I think it's interesting for people to know, how you came to doing development. And so at that time, you'd actually been doing development for a number of years, but that wasn't your original starting place, if I remember right. And I think I just think it's always fascinating for people to look at others who have had success in real estate development and done it for a long period of time. Like, how did they get there? Where did they come from? So where did that interest come from for you to get involved in development?
Sure. Thanks. And thanks for inviting me. So I went to business school in Southern Ontario. I'm a Canadian, and met an American who came up and lived with me. My wife and I started a small picture framing store back in about 1973. And we were right in front of the baby boomers. We didn't know what the hell we were doing, being both 22 and 23 years old. And about 20 years later, we had 60 stores across Canada with a couple of manufacturing plants, a couple of trucks that made deliveries, and thought we were God's gift to picture framing and art gallery business. And my function was expanding the network, controlling inventory, warehousing, and so forth, which incorporated real estate. And my undergraduate happened to be in geography, what we now call environmental science. Mm-hmm. And I tell people that I went to school at a time when continental drift was a theory. That's how long I've been out of school. I took geography because I didn't want to be full science, physics, biology, chemistry, and so forth. And I didn't want to be totally arts, English, history. So geography was the right place for me, and picked up a couple land planning courses when land planning was certainly in its infancy. I had the opportunity to pick up one course at the University of Waterloo run by the head, J.A. Kennedy, who was the first head of the Ontario Municipal Board. And most of your listeners won't know Canadian law, but it's a little bit different than in the States. And the OMB, essentially, in Ontario, is the court of last resort for anybody that has a property issue. And Mr. Kennedy, that was just absolutely dumb luck, what I call serendipity now, because it makes me sound a little bit more polished than referring to it as dumb luck. But Mr. Kennedy gave me insight into the vagaries of land planning and development. That was exciting. It just fits my sloppy, lucky, happy-go-lucky kind of personality style. Fast forward 20 years, it's now 1987. Black Monday occurred, which was the
Mm.
same in Canada as it was in the States. Typically, our economies are a little bit out of sync, but Black Monday hit both economies hard. We were in position to be purchasing about 50 acres just for a new industrial plant in Burlington, Ontario, a suburb of Toronto. Everything in Ontario is a suburb of Toronto now. Uh, and the gentleman who I was purchasing the land from, it was a private FISBO deal, had jacked the price on me twice. So Tuesday morning after Black Monday, I phoned Mr. McNee and said, "This is my best and final offer. Don't accept it by 5 o'clock tonight. I'm gone." That's not entirely true, of course, but there was a
Mhm.
negotiating technique. Mr. McNee was heavily involved in the stock market. He had to sell this, and we picked that land up in the fall of 1987. Uh, 2 years later, we sold it at 10 times the value of that property. So,
Wow.
the number
Wow.
one lesson in real estate that is always true is you make your money on the buy.
Mhm.
If you buy it right, uh, then any idiot can make money on it.
Mhm.
You buy it at the top, it doesn't matter how brilliant you are, you're going to lose it.
Mhm.
Sweeping generalization, of course. That was 1987, 1989. I went to my then wife and said, "Honey, where in the world do you want to move?" Because the numbers were of that order of magnitude. We were 39 at the time, and she selected Montecito, California, which is an absolute beautiful spot to be.
Mhm.
And we relocated our family there. Uh, Her family um, trusted my real estate acumen enough to come to Lone Jack, Missouri, to look at a couple of sections of land that were part of the patriarchal estate and need to be dissolved or sold. And I came to where the hell in the world is Lone Jack, Missouri, and and did a clandestine study. It's not rocket science. You just study your comps. And this is now 1989. For some of your listeners that are my age, they'll remember the Resolution Trust Savings and
Mm.
Loan
Yeah.
debacle that the country went through at the time. And I had Canadian cash burning a hole in my pocket. Um, when I did my comps, I came across 230 acres at the intersection of Pryor Road and 3rd Street in Lee Summit that was about to be foreclosed on the then real estate owner. And I offered an absolute rock bottom price and negotiated hard with the realtor who was representing it, and literally didn't care whether I got it or not. And I got a call a couple of days later that they accepted my offer. So we're now the proud property owner of 230 acres of absolutely drop dead gorgeous land,
Mhm.
a kind of Ozarkian feel with Cedar Creek running right through it. And or serendipity again, dumb good luck, met a gentleman by the name of Kip Scott, who was just moving out of the J.C. Nichols firm, which,
Yeah.
again, for
Yeah.
those with some age on them, will remember the esteemed J.C. Nichols company, which unfortunately went through a challenging time.
Mhm.
So I worked with Kip. We put together a plan. And this is where my Canadian background comes in, small s socialist. If you're
Mhm.
going to be a real estate developer in Canada, you need, it's not the land of the free.
Mhm.
When I say that, I do not want to be disrespectful. Uh, I've maintained my Canadian passport. I'm
Mhm.
have my green card in the States, but I'm a Canadian
Mhm.
uh, and a small s socialist. And I think that's what would typically be seen as a difference in our communities. You, as a property owner, commercial or residential, you get a lot in our communities, and um, it's that just that giving back.
Yeah.
Um, Uh, uh, we purchased that. Uh, we named the property Winterset because there's this goddamn rock that's about 6 feet below grade, if we're lucky, called Winterset limestone. It's a
Oh, okay.
soft limestone, runs from Iowa down to North Texas. The homes along Manuel Cleaver Boulevard, that's
Hmm.
Winterset limestone
Hmm.
on it. And how I discovered that, serendipity again, I don't trust geotech borers 1 inch on 50-foot centers. I go out with the biggest, baddest track hoe I can find and dig to refusal. And did that with a gentleman one day, and he was able to rip this rock and get almost another 8 or 10 feet of depth, which is beneficial because it increases the yield. If it doesn't increase the yield, it at least gives the real estate developer more flexibility. So asked him, what's the name of that rock? He said, Winterset. That's how the property got named.
Fantastic.
And
See, there's a backstory I already didn't know. That's terrific.
um, there's now 6 neighborhoods within Winterset. The serendipity again, just when we get to the end of one project or one neighborhood, if I can refer to several blocks, anywhere from 100 to 200 to 300 homes as a neighborhood, we've been lucky to be able to acquire additional land, which is not typical.
Hmm.
It's by far the norm that if a real estate project is successful, somebody will copy you on the periphery, or
Right.
some other money will come along. We've just been able to grow the project, so it's now 1,500 acres. You mentioned New Longview. New Longview was intended to be the village center for Winterset, and it's a totally different lifestyle.
Hmm.
Party on the alleys.
Hmm.
That it works. It took a long time. I'm going to say 8 or 10 years before it really hit its pace.
Yeah.
I think you may. I'll credit Clevin Klinkenberg for the phrase. There's a there now,
Yeah.
where again, sweeping generalization. If you attempt traditional neighborhood design out in a suburbia, that's a tough o. You're going to sink a lot of money into that project before
Yeah.
it hits. So New Longview is now a success. I can't say that about the commercial so
Hmm.
much because sweeping generalization, commercial follows rooftops. And on the west side of Lee Summit, we have beautiful Longview Lake and Longview College there, but not a lot of consuming rooftops. They're coming,
Right.
and that's a lesson learned.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there you go. I tried to condense about a 2-hour talk into 5 minutes.
Perfect. No, that was good. So, one thing I'm curious about. So, when you acquired the original land at Winterset, and you partnered up with Kip Scott, you had never laid out a residential subdivision before. How
Yeah,
how'd you go about that? How did you go about the process of figuring out like how to lay out a subdivision and make all that
I had a couple of undergraduate courses. I was an expert. You know, it's the master of the universe
work?
kind of psychology. We had been fortunate through my ex-wife's family had worked on a couple of lots in Boulder, Colorado, which was an education. Santa Barbara, California, on property there. I, I I built and platted property. Platted property and built buildings in southern Ontario and across Canada.
Hmm.
Uh, not a lot, 3 or 4. It was a tremendous leap. Um, but you got to remember, I'm Canadian, and there's a natural trust for all Canadians,
Yeah.
isn't there?
Yes. Yeah.
And I'd like to think that I haven't betrayed that trust that was given me by a number of markets. I did work in Mission and Gladstone and across Lee Summit at one point in time. Almost 20% of the population in Lee Summit lived or worked in one of my communities. Now that's back in the early 90s.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what thinking back on that sort of original effort that you had when you had the original Winterset land and you were working on it, were there things with 20 years later, 30 years later that you thought, gosh, I wish I'd done that differently, or um,
Um,
I just curious. I'm always curious about like because that's a monumental effort. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to plan and develop a couple hundred acres of land.
Well, but it didn't. My mind doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm.
The whole risk reward perspective is different, and that speaks to personality types. There are those of us who are bankers for a reason, risk averse,
Mm-hmm.
and there are those of us who are real estate developers and what the hell, I can do that
Mm-hmm.
kind of attitude. That's sloppy logic on my part, but it's not entirely not true. Um, we are driven by our egos in the builder and real estate community.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole batch more reason to not do something than there is to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there, a fire is lit in us, and sometimes it's simply a, a fellow who's part of a framing crew, and he gets enough money to do his first spec building, and it's successful. So now he builds a couple houses, and then he has the opportunity to pick up an acre or two and do a small development. There's an incremental expansion. Then there's from the top down somebody
Mm-hmm.
who has made their money in another industry who looks at real estate development and says, "This is easy,"
Mm-hmm.
and they end up spending their kids' inheritance, learning that no, it's not. And
Yeah.
the biggest vagary is the economic cycles. Um,
Yeah. But you think there's kind of a inherent optimism uh, in developers that are successful and keep pursuing development.
there has to be. There
Yeah.
has to be. I referenced ego, and I, I I tell myself that my ego isn't as big as it once was, but goddamn, it was huge. And that's a trap we fall into. Anybody who's successful, I think, really. And I say this, I'm 73 now,
Mm-hmm.
so I come up from a perspective that's different than when I was in my 50s. And I used to joke that I was right 70 or 80% of the time. Now I recognize I'm lucky to be right 51% of the time. So it's learned.
Yeah. So um, uh, eventually, you come across the Longview Farm land, and we met during all that process. And one of the things I've always been curious about, and this, I think this may be interesting from the perspective of not just other developers or people interested in development, but other like designers, entrepreneurs. What was it that you saw where you want? First of all, there are two things, I guess. One, what made you interested in wanting to do something different, the sort of traditional neighborhood development approach? And then secondly, taking a risk on a couple of 30-year-old guys who were barely
Geez, were you
in
30?
business. We were 30 at the time.
I thought you were in your 20s. So
Yeah. Yeah. So
there weren't that
we,
many
we were
people.
30, but we looked like we were in our 20s.
You and Brian were well connected. You put together a crackerjack team from
Mm-hmm.
across the states and
Mm-hmm.
a couple from Calgary.
Mm-hmm.
Very knowledgeable guys. That was probably the most fun I've ever had for a week
Mm-hmm.
when we staged that charrette. Um, the how it evolved, and I'll recognize Urban Lands Institute,
Mm-hmm.
which if you're a real estate developer, if you're thinking about being a real estate developer, you've got to be a member of ULI. And you remember our good friend Joe Perry.
Oh, sure.
Joe, who ran our commercial
Mm-hmm.
division, is now the head of ULI in
Mm-hmm.
Kansas City, doing a great job with the Port Authority.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it had the opportunity with ULI to visit projects at their annual and quarterly conventions across the states. Had visited Stapleton, of course, which is now called Central Park, Celebration in Florida. Um, there's a long list,
Yeah.
and through ULI had seen how you can design a village, and we needed a village center because it was all classic suburbia. I know you're an
Mm-hmm.
urban guy,
Mm-hmm.
and if I could convince my wife to be, I would be too. Um, it's one thing for mom and dad and the two kids to have a suburban residence. That's the
Mhm.
target. Uh, and isn't it nice when we can walk to a movie theater, walk to school, walk to the coffee shop, walk to the bank? And that's what that was the concept. The new Longview,
Right.
which was a hole in the donut on the west side of Lee Summit. And I'll pay my respect to Dean Goodman. Dean and a group of investors and his friends from Colorado had purchased the balance of the R.A. Long baronial estate back in 1985, which was the top of the curve.
Mm.
And as I shared, we purchased our initial holding in Lee Summit at the bottom of the curve in 1989. Dean never made money on
Mm.
New Longview and was rescued by Canadian money out of Vancouver, who kept Dean in place as the caretaker. But Dean did not have the flexibility to make the moves that are necessary
Mhm.
to make real estate work.
Mhm.
So he had proposed an apartment project abutting another development, and I was approached by the vigilante group who was opposed to
Mhm.
this apartment project to attempt to buy the property. And there's few real estate developers who want to get in bed with an unknowing group of neighbors who are opposed to anything. I
Right.
think, I want to recognize that there's a passion, and in our system, everybody has the right to share a perspective. We talk about NIMBY, not
Mhm.
that's okay, but not in my backyard.
Mhm.
Or note, not over there either.
Right.
Or banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody.
Uh-huh.
Cave, citizens against virtually everything.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I'm a Canadian, so I make sure when I'm presenting to a city council that at some point in time, I'm going to share that because that
Mhm.
has value. And then at some point in time, I make it has to be timed perfectly, but lighthearted comments about this and
Mhm.
with respect that um, everybody's entitled to their view. And I can share one example in New Longview where we had proposed an apartment project. This is now 15 years later, of 2-story and 3-story product designed in the same clipped roof, Dutch roof style of the Longview Show Horse Arena.
Mhm.
Uh, and the neighbors didn't like that. And that was the first project that I've been opposed at a Lee Summit City Council meeting.
Hmm.
And that was the driver that caused the bank to give up on me. And I ended up losing, going through a friendly foreclosure,
Mhm.
which was an education on about 75 to 100 acres out there.
Mhm.
What what is there now is 4 and 5 story apartment
Mhm.
buildings like what you see everywhere.
Yeah.
And the people who live in those apartment buildings are fine. And there's a buffer, which is what we could have also, and it's fine. And life as we know it has gone on. But but for those who are thinking about opposing something, you squint and imagine if that's not there, what's going to be there.
Yeah.
Um, that was a sidebar. Sorry to go off topic.
No, no, it's fine. I think all this is interesting. There are so many things, yeah, about that project that we could talk about, and obviously, one of the things that I'm curious about is your perspective, undertaking, trying to do a new urbanist project like that. Uh, some of the benefits, some of the challenges, things that are maybe some things that are easier, or anything, things that are harder. If there's anything easier, there may not be. It's a very difficult undertaking, but I think it was 260 acres, if I remember right, when we did the master plan. And then you're right, we had it was kind of broken up into neighborhoods, and then we had sort of a commercial center at the northwest corner. Um, and I'm fascinated to know. I'd like to share a couple of observations I have, but I'm curious, like, just more about your thoughts. First of all, about now that it's like over 20 years later, and what do you see looking back in the mirror about um, the path to doing that project.
Yeah, it was the right project. When you refer to highest and best use, um, I wish I would have had more capital, but every developer
Sure.
wishes they would have had more capital. We probably should have come out with a lesser product, a lesser priced product. Um, Chris Klein, Joe Perry, Brian, and yourself, it was a great team of insightful,
Hmm.
forward thinkers, um, all architects and land planners. That where I refer to myself more as a community builder,
Hmm. Yeah.
fluff and tickle stuff,
Yeah.
and they I I think we could have reached um, a critical mass faster if we had have built lesser product.
Hmm.
Just square footage. The architectural standards were critical,
Hmm.
I think, for it.
But just some smaller homes and starter homes and things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
We,
Hmm. Sure.
you may recall you know, in a wild ass experiment, we have a bungalow court.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
uh,
I take people to that all the time.
it is absolutely beautiful, right
Hmm.
beside the Three Sisters,
Hmm.
emblematic of the Seven Painted Ladies in San
Yeah.
Francisco.
Yeah.
So this the paint the Three Sisters probably at the time retailed for the high twos. This is back in 2003, 2004 now.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, maybe the low threes. The bungalow court right beside it were nine, um, uh, no basement homes
Hmm.
targeting the elderly. Um, 1,000 to 1,200 square feet, perhaps three or four of them had a story and a half element. And beside that was a $600,000 home.
Hmm.
So you don't do this in suburbia. You don't
Right.
build a 600 right next door to nine 150s
Hmm.
next door to three 300s.
Yeah.
But damn it, it worked.
Yeah.
And it is so cool.
Yeah.
The streetscape is wonderful. Yeah, that's one element.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm always amazed every time I go out there and see is certainly those first few phases of residential, the first few neighborhoods that were built. And I love it. I mean, it's remarkable to see how well it works.
well, and I'll compliment Russ Pearson and his team. He eventually acquired control of that land, and I think for the most part he's continued the streetscape
Hmm.
as per your plan.
Hmm. But yeah, the interaction of the park space and the residential and all that really felt like it. I mean, when you go there today, it has those postcard moments
Mm-hmm.
of what you would
Oh,
expect
go
to
out there
have.
during Halloween
Yeah.
or Christmas, the summertime, the alley parties. It's really cool.
Yeah. But I know one of the big challenges that you had in that era in particular was just finding somebody who could build what you wanted to have built. And so you formed your own home building company as part of the process as well, which I don't think was something you anticipated you were going to do when you took on the project. So that must have been an enormous challenge for you to stand up a home building company too during all that.
Well, that we did in conjunction with Arbor Walk. We'd had a contract for about 150 homes from a real estate firm in St. Louis. It's still in business, McBride Homes, and they ended up walking on us. And this is where the ego comes into effect. You think, well, what the hell, we can build those, and that's what started the home building company. And the evolution into the new Longview product was
Mm-hmm.
fairly easy. The challenge with T&D is uh, maybe three elements versus suburban building. You have the alley, a 12-foot concrete alley is the
Mm-hmm.
right cross section, and then 3 feet on either side for easements for utilities.
Right.
And then out front, you typically run your sanitary and water. And challenge is not the right word, but it took negotiation with the utility providers to be able to play well in the sandbox with those tight confines. The homes were closer together. Of course, 70 and 80 years ago, prior to air conditioning, that was different. But today, windows typically aren't opened, so
Mhm.
that close proximity is fine. Most of us don't throw the ball around in the backyard with kids. We have parks, so the lifestyle for families is great once you get a head around that not everybody needs this big backyard, if assuming you have parks.
Mhm.
The other is in Kansas City, we're cursed with clay-based soils,
Hmm.
and if you have a quarter inch of rain in anything less than an hour, you're going to have surface flow,
Mhm.
and that surface flow in design is the toughest thing to work with, so that people don't have wet spots in their land. You're working in tight confines with equipment that doesn't always grade perfectly. Um, so those were the three: the tighter buildings, the cross section of the alleys, and the clay base soils.
What about from strictly from the side of the financial side or the marketing side? How what were some of the challenges there, or just things that were worked well?
Yeah, I don't. We had enough credibility as a company and enough assets on our under our belt to provide the collateral for our loans.
Mhm.
Um, we it, it, there's an inefficiency in using your own cash and not taking advantage of leverage. But the advantage of using your own cash is when the economy turns, and it always turns, you're not going to
Mhm.
have the risk of foreclosure or challenges that interest rates do.
Mhm.
We have been, you know, a lot of serendipity on our side in this latest economy where, when interest rates double
Mhm.
and absorption is cut by 90%.
Yeah.
If you're highly leveraged, you're out of business.
Yeah.
And we're fortunate. We're in a good place during this cycle. We have a good sized project up in Liberty that we're working on, and
Mhm.
it's probably we would have preferred. I don't know. I just caught myself. I'm glad that we didn't get in the ground 2 years ago because we'd have 10 times the amount of cash leverage that we do right now
Mm.
in a slowing economy. We're aiming to be in the ground this summer on a 1,000-acre project, which will be pretty cool.
Yeah. Were there one of the things that we talked about early on that project on New Longview was just the how to market it, how to sell it in a suburban community that hadn't seen anything new quite like that, and uh, it seemed like my memory of it was that was pretty successful. That you all found a great way to position the project.
Yeah, we referred to it as Brookside with basements that don't leak. So cheap shot at my friends in Brookside. Sorry about that.
That's very apropos. As somebody who lives in a 110-year-old house, the basement is we're trying to renovate it right now because it's a mess. But yeah, um, did you? Where did the buyers come from? Were there were they from all over? Were they mostly just looking in Lee Summit anyway?
No, it was all over. We were fortunate to be highly regarded at the time as a project. Um, I'm drawing a blank right now as to the award that we received
Hmm.
um, in competition with Ron Jury's President Hotel. I mean,
Oh, there was a Historic Kansas City Foundation award, I think, and then there
oh,
were some other. There
you,
were a few.
you
You
name
got a
it,
bunch of
you name
awards.
it. New
Yeah,
Longview got it.
yeah,
It was a
yeah.
sexy animal at the time.
Right.
So we enjoyed high profile in Kansas City Star, the Business Journal,
Yeah.
any of the
Right.
press at that point. So the curious folks came to us. One thing I learned in the when we first took this project on, is Kansas City split into four groups: Eastern Jackson County, Johnson County, north of the river, downtown. And there's a lot of loyalty, maybe comfort, exhibited by the folks who live in one of those four areas to remaining in that
Mm-hmm.
area.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that's I've learned, folks in Lee Summit are very proud of the R7 school district, and my now wife was a product of R7, award-winning teacher, and I have lots of respect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but similarly, the Liberty school system, the Parkville school
Right.
system, several in Johnson County, and every resident of those areas whose kids are fortunate enough to go to those public schools have all drank the Kool-Aid and think this is the best school district in the market. There's a lot of excellent school districts.
Yeah.
We've been lucky to be
Yeah.
involved in them.
Yeah. Um, I was the last few years we've as a family had the good fortune to go spend Thanksgiving down in the Florida Panhandle in some of the communities that you know well. So we've stayed in Watercolor 3 of the last 4 years, which is right adjacent to Seaside.
Mm-hmm.
For most people going there, you wouldn't even really recognize a difference between Seaside and Watercolor because they're basically connected and have a lot of similar look and feel and everything. But those of us in the business obviously kind of know where the lines are and what's different and what's not. But this last year, I was walking around and I kind of caught myself thinking again, why it's Watercolor in that area. Those developments are so incredibly successful. They're beautiful. They're wonderful places. Uh, not just have the walkable characteristics, but even if you're just thinking of beautiful residential areas, they're just wonderful in that regard. And I caught myself again wondering, like, why haven't we seen more of this
Mm-hmm.
uh, in the Midwest in particular? Because that's where I live. It's a part of the country I care a lot about. And when I walk around Seaside and Watercolor, they feel very Midwestern to me. Just small town mom and apple pie sort of stuff, baseball, you name it. It just feels very much like Americana. And yet, 35 years since the advent of new urbanism, we just haven't seen much in the way, even after New Longview, there hasn't been a lot in the way of like new greenfield development that
Mm-hmm.
has that look and feel. So why what's your perspective on that? Why is that? Uh,
I have two truths. One is, in Kansas City, we're blessed with 200 miles of green space in any direction you go. And land is not the point of competitive difference that it is in the Panhandle or any place on the East Coast or the West Coast or on the Eastern Front abutting the Rockies, Denver, down in
right.
Colorado Springs, Fort Collins. So nationally, land here is inexpensive. I'd say ridiculously inexpensive,
Yeah.
but folks who are trying to buy something wouldn't agree with that statement because it's all relative. That's why none of the majors are in town.
Hmm.
Major home builders
Right.
taking a 500-acre position is of no benefit here because it's easy to buy another 500 acres.
Mm-hmm.
Sweeping generalization.
Mm-hmm.
The other aspect is, who is the customer? The first time I visited Seaside with ULI, and I'm going to get my numbers wrong. How many residences are there in Seaside?
Oh God, that's a good question. I mean, it's only 60 acres.
Yeah,
Uh,
maybe 180,
yeah,
something like that. Maybe
it's not
190.
many.
Yeah,
It's a few hundred at most.
yeah. When we were there, we stayed at a timeshare, and I, I, I don't want to give an incorrect number, but I'm going to say 90% of the residences were available as timeshares. They
Hmm.
were not full-time
Correct.
residential units.
Right.
Basically, it's a horizontal hotel.
It is. Yeah.
Um, I don't have the numbers on watercolor
It's
or
similar. Very
okay.
similar.
So these are families from Atlanta,
Yeah.
Tallahassee, commuting there, taking a position as a summer home. We don't have that element of need here, summer home. That's Lake of the Ozarks,
Right.
which is laid out differently.
Yeah.
And isn't that curious? Uh, so a living, breathing community where people, you're missing middle,
Yeah. Yeah.
the starter home, the bungalow court designed for the individual, the John Knox Village. You need all of that for a true community. A vacation property is different, and it would be cool. Um, I reference. We've got a number of years under our belt, so I'll share this as a real
Mm-hmm.
story. Harry Lloyd uh, had been spending his kid's inheritance on Loch Lloyd,
Mm-hmm.
and Mr. Lloyd passed away. It's a work of art,
Mm-hmm.
gated community.
Patrick Mahomes lives there now.
Absolutely, yep. And the Mr. Lloyd passed away. The property was losing something like $1 million a month
Oh,
on the golf course, the maintenance. The works of art cost money to maintain,
right.
and I hadn't signed the paperwork yet, but we had been negotiating with the family trust to take that on, and then I'm forgetting the gentleman's name. This is an embarrassment. I've already shared I'm 73.
It's okay. I'm 54, and it happens several times a day.
Cerner, one of the two partners with Cerner.
Yeah. It was Cliff Illig and Neil Patterson.
Mr. Patterson.
Yeah.
Mr. Patterson ended up purchasing it and building a beautiful home.
Right. Right.
And he paid twice what I had been negotiating for that property.
Hmm.
And it's wonderful. Mr. Patterson was able to take Loch Lloyd to a whole nother level.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, the National. It's the same team that did the National up in
Mm-hmm.
Parkville. And it's tough for a for-profit minded real estate developer, which I flatter myself as being,
Mm-hmm.
to compete with gentlemen who are bringing that kind of largesse to creating art.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's, I flatter myself, that's what Winterset is,
Mm-hmm.
and what New Longview could have been had I been more awake for 2008. 2008, for those who don't know, was the last big recession in our industry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you weren't the only one
Mm-hmm.
caught up in all that. We have many friends and colleagues who were all caught up in that. So, what then? What are you up to today? Because I know you are still active and doing a lot of things, and you have this really interesting background. You even got involved in trying to do a couple of urban projects for a while.
So prior to 2008,
Yeah.
we wanted to be a planning and design and construction firm
Mm-hmm.
of record from basically Des Moines to Wichita, and Topeka to Columbia. And we had the muscle,
Mm-hmm.
Chris Klein, Joe Perry,
Mm-hmm.
and others, Zalman Cohen, and others, to be able to accomplish that. And then 2006, we started seeing a slowdown.
Yeah.
2007, definitely. And then,
Yeah.
disaster hit in 2008. And I was fortunate to have the Winterset brand in it doesn't matter what industry you're in, but in turmoil, the market goes to quality, and
Mm-hmm.
Winterset had a long track record. Even in the worst of times, we would be building 10 to 15 homes a year, which doesn't sound like much when you're used to building 70 to 100.
Yeah.
But that's enough to keep bread on the table and keep going until the market returns. So Winterset is still going on. We're
Mm-hmm.
designing phase 36 now.
Phase 36. Wow. Amazing.
Very, very fortunate for that. We were able to hold on to 4 good commercial buildings in New Longview. That's
Mm-hmm.
where our corporate office is now. I mentioned Stapleton,
Mm-hmm.
one of the first 3 folks that were hired by the city of Denver to figure out what the hell do we do with a 5,000-acre mothballed airport. Tom Hart and I hooked up, and we've been working on a project up in Liberty
Mm-hmm.
for the better for longer than we care to admit right now.
Mm-hmm.
And
And that's a large master plan community as well, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's 1,000 acres where collectively we're bringing to bear everything that we've learned in the 20,000 acres that between the two of us we've been
Mm-hmm.
fortunate enough to be able to recreate the canvas on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, what's the thinking on that? So, how has your experience over the years kind of impacted or influenced your thinking on how to create a community of that scale
Yeah.
now?
Yeah. I, the economics require us to recognize the need for absorption faster.
Mm-hmm.
Money's more expensive, patience is less, um, brand perception changes quicker, um, and what people are looking for is different. With Winterset, we were experimenting with walking trails. We introduced a policy that cedar shakes were not allowed at a time when Lakewood, Leawood, Lenexa all required cedar shakes.
Mm-hmm.
We were the first to require asphalt shingles, dual source heat pumps,
Mm-hmm.
street tree plans, and walking trails.
Mm-hmm.
That created the ethic in Winterset that has been maintained and tweaked a little bit. Uh, as we squint and imagine what people are going to want in 20 and 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
the hottest thing right now, that doesn't sound very professional, but what up and coming master plan communities, anything larger than several hundred acres, will have on site farms or green space where growing is fruits, vegetables,
Mm-hmm.
is encouraged. So we have an 8-acre demonstration farm
Mm-hmm.
connecting with about 6 miles of walking trails. Um, of course, the proverbial soccer lacrosse fields.
Sure.
There, everybody has to have that now, and
Yeah.
pickleball. Let's not forget pickleball.
Yeah, I got a pickleball set for Christmas. So
It is one noisy sport, so
it
it
is.
has to be
Yeah.
located
Yeah.
properly.
Yeah.
It's more of what we've learned in Winterset, what we learned in Stapleton,
Mm-hmm.
um, with what we're recognizing. I say recognizing it. It's all a gamble. It's all a
Mm-hmm.
bet. We flatter ourselves, whether it's through ULI or any of the other, and there's a multitude of high quality organizations who volunteers like Kevin Klinkenberg and Dave
Mm-hmm.
Gale will speak to and address and pontificate from on high as to the best way to do something.
Yeah.
I like using the expression squint and imagine what it looks like 50 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets people thinking, because we are imprinting this land. And I'm not a God-fearing guy, but nature is wonderful when you let it do its thing.
Mm-hmm.
We photographed 2 deer in my backyard that had nested yesterday morning, and I was up at about 6, and just as they were starting to wake up. That is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
And there's few of us that get to enjoy that, or even enjoy deer having them in their
Yeah.
backyard. But that's what turns me on, and being able to, like I say, build community. When you have a community association, another thing that I pontificate on is we don't have an HOA. Homeowners associations I don't like. I like the phrase community association. It evokes a different sense
Hmm.
of entitlement.
Mm-hmm.
That whole community. NPR was running a program on community as I drove in here this morning, and the style of how we choose to interact is predicated by the boxes that we choose to live in
Mm-hmm.
and the activities that are presented to us in those neighborhoods. So it's cool when you can get people out. Winterset has, for I'm going to say the last 8 or 9 years, 2 times a year, had a Trek the Trails program where through the website you can find out where the trail hike is,
Hmm.
and the signage is such that sign number 1 might be the raccoon station, so you have to write down that you saw where the raccoon station was and what
Hmm.
number it aligned with, and it gets people out there.
Yeah.
The phenomenon is you can design a golf course community and less than 20% of the people play golf.
Right.
You can design these beautiful walking trails down in an 80-foot deep Ozarkian type geology. And I'd like to think that more than 50% of the people, at least once a year, get out on the trails.
Hmm.
Um, I want to believe that's true.
Hmm. I'm sure it is. That seems likely, at least based on what I've seen in lots of different places. Dave, what do you ever have the chance to like give advice to younger people who are thinking about real estate or development? Does anybody ever ask you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Quite often. I have two boys, Cutter
Hmm.
and Hunter, who
Hmm.
were teenagers at the time, and they're my exit strategy. Uh, my wife's son is in real estate, so we hope that he also will be involved. And then my partner's kids. Sure. Uh, gosh, this I really appreciate this opportunity, Kevin. I have to predicate all this with what I've done was all a point in time,
Yeah.
and the art of real estate development uh, continues to evolve, and the parameters. How much does it cost per square foot for the box, the construction? What can we afford? Principal and interest, which is the primary measurement of what we can afford on a monthly basis. Where we want to be. The I hesitate to say this is the right way or the wrong way because I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not a very educated answer. I try and determine what are why does it seem glorious? Are they outdoorsy people? Or do they come at it from the building component, from the financing component? Um, I've been a longstanding member of Rotary and ULI, as I mentioned, been heavily involved philanthropically back when we had a bigger business. That has to be managed probably better than I did. It took a lot of time away from the business. I loved it. It was quite flattering to be
Hmm.
asked to serve, and I hoped that I gave value. Um, but the essence is there is no one answer. There's lots of books that have been written, and they're all past tense. How do we know what the future holds? Principal and interest, monthly principal and interest, of course, taxes, insurance, and other things, is the primary predicator of how much we can afford
Hmm.
on a monthly basis. Uh, what is going to be the cost of that box? Uh, where does the family want to settle? There's so many questions um, that it's staggering to think of planning too far ahead in this business.
Hmm.
I used to joke
Hmm.
that a builder's time frame was about 6 months. Now, this is going back a number of years.
Hmm.
From the day they started digging the foundation to the day they turned the keys over to the new homeowner.
Right.
And um, in our business, in real estate development, in this market, it probably has to be about 3 years. Now,
Yeah.
I shared in our Liberty
Yeah.
project, we just passed our 10th anniversary
Mm.
of having our first meeting with the City of Liberty on putting this project together.
Mm.
No fault of the City of Liberty; they've been wonderful, very professional team, or the property owners. But it's just these are complicated. Um, I'd share the NIMBY note cave banana jargon. Words matter. The community association versus HOA, master planned community or mixed use. Tom and I, who are fairly elitist, drives us nuts when an apartment building and a Starbucks refers to themselves as mixed use.
I know.
but
I know.
but
Everything becomes a buzzword at some point.
that's right. You're absolutely right. Uh, so we don't know. Tom will tell the story that when he started Stapleton Transit Oriented Design, had not yet been coined.
Right.
And now the streetcar, isn't that a wonderful
Yeah.
element added to the Kansas City fabric? That's TOD. TND, traditional neighborhood design, 30 years ago. It hadn't been invented yet. The team
Right.
at Seaside was working that, and that, of course, we know that as
Hmm.
Brookside. That was the same kind of element.
Right.
Just getting back to the future, quite a movie.
Mhm.
So my ego isn't what it used to be. If you had asked me that question 20 years ago, hell yes, I had all the answers.
That's okay. So did I. But we're still here.
We are, aren't we lucky?
Yeah, we are. Well, Dave, this has been great. Thanks very much. I'm so glad you're able to come in and do this and for us to catch up and look forward to staying in touch and following what you're up to with all of your various ventures these
No,
days.
very much appreciate the time, Kevin. Best wishes.
All right. Thank you.